Ramp agents are under fire for the way they treat a bunch of golf bags. I myself am a former ramp agent for 2 different airlines, and I plan on giving my 2 cents about this as well as many other things. What do I think? Stick around to find out. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Ramblin Ramp Agent Podcast. I'm Verrier, and welcome to our first episode. Be sure to subscribe to the Verrier Aviation YouTube channel, and today's sponsor is, of course, myself, or more specifically, my Patreon, Verrier Media. Get access to exclusive content and a whole bunch of other goodies, so be sure to check that out. So, I've been wanting to talk about this for a while. The only reason that I've delayed it is because I was sick with strep and I wasn't able to speak. Or, I mean, I could speak, but I sounded like a prepubescent Bruce Willis, so unfortunately that wasn't possible last week. But thankfully I've recovered, so we can finally get back on to the subject. So, if you haven't heard, there was a lot of controversy over this video that was posted by one of the teammates in the East Tennessee State men's golf team. And it is a video of, well, supposedly of Delta ramp agents tossing a bunch of golf bags, tossing their stuff. So I'm just going to say my thoughts on this. I was a ramp agent for roughly about 2.5, maybe 3 years. I worked for 2 different airlines. I'm not going to say which airlines, mainly for privacy reasons, but I worked for a regional airline as well as a mainline carrier. And, I had lots of experience, have lots of wisdom. Now, I'm not going to say I'm an expert in all things ramp agents, but I certainly have enough experiences that at least it'll give you guys a reason to actually listen to me. So, when I worked at a regional airline, at the time we were kind of understaffed, so it was not uncommon for one person to do the job of at least 3 people. And yes, they were RJs. However, loading an airplane, working on an airplane as a ramp agent, that requires at minimum probably about maybe 3 people. Especially in our case, because not only were we doing that, but we were also doing other stuff, like we would clean the airplane. And most of them were quick turns, which means it comes in and then it immediately goes back on out, and you can have as little as 20 minutes in between those flights. As I worked at a mainline carrier, the rest of my time as a ramp agent, I was there. I worked at a pretty big international airport, and again, I'm not going to say any specifics, just for privacy concerns, but I worked at that airport, and it was a good job. I actually loved being a ramp agent. It was one of my most favorite jobs. I'm just going to talk about my thoughts as a ramp agent, as a former ramp agent, working for both a mainline and a regional carrier, working, I've worked on narrow bodies, wide bodies, RJs. I've seen quite a lot. So we're just going to go ahead and look at the footage. So if you haven't checked it out, so here's the video.
Oh my gosh, they are throwing your golf clubs, guys.
I know, I can see.
Even on the ground.
That there, my friend, is the Delta difference. That's making the Delta difference. Yeah, so he's just tossing them over there. Okay, here are my thoughts. Some of it I'm going to admit is a little bit controversial, at least compared to some people. But from my experience as a ramp agent, this is a really stupid move on his part. Acting like this, obviously it's a dumb move to make, and one of the things that they tell you if you become a ramp agent is that working at an airport, it's like a big aquarium. It's like a big airplane aquarium. Like we can go to an aquarium. There's glass, the big glass windows so you can see the animals. Same at an airport. You got the big glass windows. You can look outside. You got the windows in the airplane. And, you get guys like me. You get, overgrown children who, still have a childish sense of love and wonder for these airplanes. And people pick up on those things. And you get some travelers who pick up on a lot more stuff than others. And then not to mention the security cameras, some of which have really sophisticated technology like thermal imaging. A lot of them are getting really, really impressive. you have that, and then of course there's people having their phones out, recording those things. I mean, you get people making travel vlogs, you get people such as myself who like to record while they're on the flight, and it really is just not the place to be dicking around. It really isn't, at least not in full view of the passengers. You gotta be really mindful of that kind of stuff, and turns out this particular guy really isn't. So one thing I just want to point out, just as an observation, and I'm not really, I'm not saying it makes a major difference, but it's just something for me at least. If you look at their vests, it says Unify. The reason that matters is because, so a very important thing you have to understand, particularly if you're a passenger flying, is not all of the ramp agents work for the airline that you are flying on. So for example, so in this case, these are contractors. So a lot of airlines will have private contractors that handle ground operations. It's usually done at airports that aren't really their main hubs. And I've noticed a lot of budget carriers, a handful of budget carriers I've noticed do these kinds of things, particularly at the airport I worked at, JetBlue, Spirit, and Frontier had, I remember they had contractors that worked on those planes. And it's not just the ramp agents, but it also includes the customer service, people working at the ticket counter. A lot of that stuff, it's usually, it's somebody else that'll handle those things. And it's typically at a place where there's only one gate that the plane flies at, or if there's only a handful of planes there that go in and out each day. The reasons airlines do that, I'm not 100% certain. I'm sure there's maybe it's just more cost effective or just easier in terms of managing resources, but some contractors do get benefits. They get flight benefits. There are some, however, that don't, but regardless, sometimes you'll have the mainline employees, so the people working for the airline that are actually working on those planes, or if you're flying on a regional carrier. So let's say if you're flying on American Eagle, let's just say it's Envoy Airlines. So that's one of the regional partners. They might have, it might be Envoy employees working or doing the ground operations for that flight. And different airlines have different standards. Now, obviously, in terms of handling the bags, they're going to have, they're all going to be on the same page, but each kind of has their own policies. They have their own way of enforcing things, and they have their own way of doing things. But I just want to point out, so these are not actually Delta ramp agents. These are private contractors. It doesn't really necessarily change anything, but that's just something I like to point out. Okay, but the other thing I'm just going to say, so I feel I have some mixed emotions on this, because on the one hand, I feel sympathetic to them. They're on the one hand, I feel obviously it's dumb what they did, and you really shouldn't be doing this as a ramp agent. It's just a dumb move. But on the other hand, I can sympathize with what they're feeling, particularly this particular ramp agent, because being a ramp agent it's not always a fun job. It's a very hard job. I'm not going to say it's the hardest job on earth, but physically it is a very demanding job. The job consists of not only heavy lifting, but you're going to be outside when it's hot as hell, when it's really cold, if it's raining or something. I remember my dad also worked as a ramp agent a long time ago, and I remember when I first got a job as a ramp agent, he said to, it's good to pack an extra pair of gloves and an extra pair of socks, and maybe an extra uniform or something, because if it starts raining, I mean you will get soaked, and particularly the socks, it is a struggle around all day with just wet socks. Not only does it get to be a bit much after a while, but also that's how you get trench foot. Working, it got so cold one day that my fingers were going numb, and I remember I have to constantly keep rubbing my fingers together just to get the feeling back in the fingertips. My gloves worked just fine. It was just at the fingertips. There wasn't enough insulation, so it wouldn't keep it warm enough. So you got things like that, and then there's the heavy lifting, and there's, when you're inside the bins, you're either going to be kneeling or you might be kind of hunched over. And that can kind of take a toll on your back. It can take a toll on your legs. I always feel like I'm an old man with arthritis every time I try to get out of the bins. It's like I'm trying to, slowly stretch out my legs, going, ah. When I hear people bitching about how, the bags are being tossed or something, and I understand why people feel that way. I'm not saying you should. But, to me, depending on the person, sometimes to me it kind of comes off as, like the Stepford child. Oh my, the Stepford wife is complaining. The Stepford child is complaining that the peasants are handling his bags inappropriately. They're handling it quite roughly. The thing is, first of all, so as far as tossing bags goes, that's not actually unheard of. In fact, that's kind of how we get the bags loaded into the plane to begin with, in a timely manner, especially. Now, it's not like we're not chucking them necessarily. I mean, we do kind of toss them. We'll toss them. There's two people in the bin, they'll kind of toss them and they'll kind of slide them into the spot. But another thing I'm going to say as a ramp agent, and not just as a ramp agent, but I mean, I've worked in warehouses. The stuff that you see in this case, like them tossing the bags, or like, if you see like a FedEx driver throwing your package or something, that stuff is pretty tame compared to the stuff you don't see. That's what you gotta be worried about. Because, like in warehouses, there are packages that have gotten destroyed because they either get caught like in conveyors, or they fall off, or they get run over or something. Airports are the exact same way. Like this stuff is pretty tame compared to a lot of the other stuff I've seen. Because I mean, there have been times that bags have gotten caught like in the conveyor belts, like in some of the mechanics, like the machinery, and it can tear the bags apart, or something like gets crushed into it or something. There's stuff that's fallen off of conveyors. And it's not uncommon for bags to fall off of the belt loader. It's particularly like if it's snowing or if it's like icy, like those things just kind of. Like if there's snow on the belt, it will not catch anything. It just slides right down, and it goes. And I mean, it really, really goes. Particularly if if you're on a really tall, like if you're on a plane that's real tall, so like an Airbus, or like if it's like a wide body or something, or like a 5.7. I mean, that thing is just gonna slide right down, and I mean, it's gonna go like full speed ahead. So it's not just that, but then you also there's also stuff like when the baggage carts are running around, I mean, driving those tugs around, there's not much keeping those bags inside those carts. Like in those covered carts, there's only just that curtain, and that's about it. Then there's those other ones you see, like we use like oversized bags, like Delta uses that, United used them. Like these little flat, these other ones they use for like oversized or for like special bags. So like, if you're traveling, like we have animals or something. And it's honestly, I've seen things fall off of baggage carts. I've seen things get run over. And there have been some bags, like I remember seeing a video on TikTok a long time ago of like a bag that was like, I guess that was like out, like someone was filming inside the airport, like a bag was just starting to like roll away on its own, like on the ramp. And that kind of thing's not uncommon. That actually happens quite a bit. Typically it doesn't go more than 10 feet if people are paying attention, but I mean, some stuff will just kind of start to wobble, or someone bumps into it and just starts rolling. And typically what'll happen is like, so like a lot of airlines, so like when I was working, if we had a bag that, like, so let's say we're loading a flight to Milwaukee, but we get a bag that's supposed to be going to Chicago. What we do is it's like, okay, we're gonna, like if that's not our flight, so like if it's going to a different gate or something, we, and if it's too far of a walk or something, which most of the time usually would be, we just take the bag and we put it kind of like on the edge of the roadway. And typically what would happen is like that was kind of like our way of saying like, like to the bag runners, like, hey, this bag isn't, this bag's supposed to be somewhere else. And I remember sometimes like those things, like if they started rolling, I mean, they would start to really roll. Or like someone would bump into it, or, someone would maybe run into it somehow, and it's very rarely on purpose. But it's not uncommon for that kind of thing to happen. And then of course there's the stuff going on inside the bin. And this is kind of where my sympathy kind of comes in, because so as a ramp agent, you are not just going to be loading bags, but you're going to be loading all kinds of stuff. So for example, at a mainline carrier, you might get mail. So I mean, it could vary from like just these big mesh bags filled with with envelopes or something, or you're talking like full-sized crates filled with the most random stuff. And I remember particularly flights that were going out to like the East Coast. So I mean, flights that were going out to like, they're going out to Florida or, places of that nature. I remember we would get like tons and tons and tons of boxes, and I'm not talking like a small like Amazon package. I mean, we're talking like pallets filled with these massive boxes, like the kinds that would fill an entire pallet, just filled with like seafood. Like it'd be seafood or it'd be something along those lines. And I don't mind the smell of seafood too much, but some people do. But I mean, those things those things can stink up the bin real quickly. And, that's like, if you have bags that start to smell like fish for some reason, that would probably be one of the reasons why. You get that. And then you get like, these wooden crates, and it can be filled with all kinds of stuff. The one that I remember seeing most commonly is what some people refer to as HR, which stands for human remains. So basically like a casket or like a body. And those things were a pain in the ass to move because, first of all, the phrase dead weight has a lot of meaning, okay? That actually is referring to the fact that things that are dead bodies are very, very heavy. Okay, I mean, we're talking like 300 or 400 pounds, and it's not like, these aren't like obese people. I mean, these are like, average sized people, but it's just all that weight on top of like the weight of the crate itself. It gets real fucking heavy. But then on top of that too, if you remember the episode of Family Guy where the Star Wars episode, where they're trying to move that couch out of that trash compactor, that's about what it felt like trying to move those caskets in the airplanes. I mean, so not only are they extremely heavy, but it's very difficult to maneuver, and it's not uncommon for those things to get wedged in the bin door or in the hatch. So it's like you had to constantly keep readjusting it, and sometimes it was like the caskets would be like the crates would be so wide that the belt loader wouldn't actually be able to move it, because it would just kind of lay on top of, like, it'd be laying on top of the sides of the belt loader, so the actual belt wouldn't really be able to move it, and on top of all that weight. So I mean, it's challenging to get those things in there. It is a challenge. And then, so you get that, and then you get people moving some of the weirdest stuff. I remember there was like a flight we had from New York that just had like a bunch of random, like, I'm guessing a family was moving or something, but it's like they just it was just really lazy packaging, and it was just random shit. Like, it looked like metal pipes, or like metal, like the pieces like for like a metal bed frame. And most of these things were either heavy, or they were really long, or they were just were not the kind of thing that, it's very difficult to move. Okay, they're very, very difficult to move. And there was just so damn much of it too. And that kind of stuff can get very frustrating. And then not to mention the fact too that, so the other thing on an airplane is, if you think of like the cargo bins, so technically like the cargo compartment, it's not like one compartment, like one bin for the one compartment. Technically there's multiple bins inside each compartment. So like so you'll have like the forward compartment, and it'll have bin 1 and bin 2. You have the aft compartments, like the back, and then that'll have like 2, 3, and 4, whatever. Or it'll have like 3 or 4, it depends on the particular aircraft. But, and there were some planes I absolutely hated loading, and, like, people hate loading RJs, and I mean, there was one that I hated, which was the CRJ 700, but that was just because of the way it was laid out, because it's like, it's not a perfect square, it's just like, there's the lavatory that kind of pokes out, and then there's a little, like, Wi-Fi box, which is just like a router surrounded by a metal cage, and it's, and it just cuts down the space, and you have to kind of like wedge it, like, certain bags you have to kind of like wedge in between the wall and the router. So I mean, I hated loading that plane, but the one plane I absolutely hated the most, as far as like a mainline narrow body, was the Airbus 319. I fucking hated loading that plane, particularly the forward bin. Particularly the forward bin I absolutely hated, because so technically it's big enough to be just its own bin and just that. However, it's split into 2. And so the first bin is like maybe like just over a foot, like it's maybe just over like a foot, like I'm sorry, like so there's 2 bins, but really it's only big enough to be just one. And they're usually separated by a net. And that first bin literally is like it's like maybe just about like a foot long, so it's like it's like, a couple feet wide, so basically it can maybe like fit just like one like average size suitcase, like in terms of the length, and you can fit maybe like 3 suitcases in terms of width, like just laying them out flat. So that cuts down the amount of space, and that can be a bit of a challenge, particularly if there's some kind of weight restriction and you have to be very particular about it. So there's that. And then the other thing too, particularly with Airbuses, is that like the forward bins, like they'll be literally like right at the like it'll start or it'll be like literally right where the hatch is, which means that you may have to kind of like, there are times you might have to you basically have to kind of lean over the edge a little bit to actually fit the bags in there, which I absolutely hated that, and it made absolutely no sense to me. But the 319 was the worst. I absolutely hated loading that. That and the 318, they're both awful. Those ones sucked. But so you got that, and and it's just, you get all this cargo, and it's like sometimes you might have like the whole bin, like the whole compartment will just be nothing but like cargo, like not like bags, but just packages or something, or crates, and you get that, and then there's also like AOG, COMAT, and what that stands for. So COMAT is short for company material, and then AOG stands for like aircraft on ground, which is like, it typically consists of like aircraft parts for, it's like aircraft parts for a plane that's been grounded, and that's, pretty high priority, like urgent type of thing. Then COMAT it stands for company material, so basically that can consist of like aircraft parts to like office supplies or something, and it's just, depending on what it is, it would be high priority, but if it was just office supplies or something, I mean, it was like, who cares? Either that, or it could be like, for example, if someone, like if a ramp agent left something in the bin, if like fell out of their pot, or something like that, it would that would also be like, they'd have to fly it back, and that would also be that would be considered COMAT. So so you got all those things, but as far as the job itself, so all those things on top of each other, it's not a very easy job. it does take, I'm not saying it's the hardest job on earth, but it takes a lot of effort. It's very physical. You often don't have much time to work with. You have some of these quick turns that can be, I mean, you may have as little as like 20 minutes to get, not only to get the bags off of the plane, but then to get the next set of bags and get them on the plane, on top of stuff like, for example, like if we have to fill like the potable water, or, like in the case, like when I worked at the regional airline, we had to clean the airplane, we had to do lab service. Thankfully at the mainline carrier, that was a contractor that did all that stuff, but at the regional airline, we had to do all that stuff ourselves, which absolutely fucking sucked. So as I said, it's like working on a plane. It's like, that's a job that you need at least 3 people to do. And at the regional airline, we only had maybe there were times there was only just one person working that entire flight. And then at the mainline carrier, you had to have at least 3 people on the gate. And they were pretty strict about that too. So honestly, it's a difficult job, okay? And it requires quite a lot of effort. And, some people, some airlines have better resources than others. So in the case of these guys, I mean, they're contractors, so I doubt that they're going to have the best resources, but but that's really not saying very much, particularly if it's like for Delta, like the mainline Delta. So, but it is a very frustrating job. And like I said before, the stuff you really gotta be worried about is not what's happening. It's not what you're seeing, but what you don't see. But as far as okay, so my opinion about these particular people, I think it's kind of stupid what this guy's doing. He's being an absolute jackass. Now, I don't know what's going on in his head. Maybe he's upset about something, you never know with people, maybe he, got into an argument with somebody, or maybe he's just having a rough day, or, maybe he's just really tired or something. And, the contractors sometimes get flight benefits, but there are some that don't. And then, they don't get paid nearly as much. Well, it depends on the contractor, but a lot of them don't get paid as much compared to the mainline employees. But you're going to get a lot of those people who get upset and do that, and I guess, he just really didn't care, and I think he shouldn't have done that, and particularly you shouldn't do that in front of the windows where people could see what you're doing. But that being said, I do feel sympathetic though, because it is a hard job. But I imagine that Delta, because most airlines, stuff like this happens, they're gonna get a lecture about it, oh my god, they're gonna get a lecture. They're going to get a lecture during their briefing or something, during their morning powwow or whatever, and they're going to emphasize, don't throw the bags. And I'm sure their corporate's going to have some kind of PSA on how to properly handle bags, and a reminder that if you blah, 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 blah. And usually if this kind of stuff happens, it was not uncommon for supervisors to be hyper analyzing every single little thing you do. And I don't really mind that stuff too much, but it can be annoying as hell when you're just trying to do your job, and then they look, you handle a bag a certain way, and it's no, you don't use your left hand, you use your right hand. It's bro, who gives a damn? But, this is usually the reason why that stuff happens. So, I'm sure they got a stern talking to about it, and I imagine that a lot of employees are definitely going to get lectured about that. And as far as the contracts with Unify, I don't know if that might affect them, but I'm not really sure how in the short term at least. But honestly, I think it's dumb what he did, and I think, frankly, there's a better way to handle your issues than to just act that way. But that being said, I wasn't there. I don't know. And it's a very hard job, so I do feel at least somewhat sympathetic about what he's going through and what he's dealing with. But those are my thoughts as a ramp agent, and from what I've dealt with. And I know I've been kind of rambling a little bit, but that's just what I've gone through as a former ramp agent, and I know from experience, a lot of people who are commenting on it either haven't worked in aviation or they haven't worked as ramp agents. And I'm not saying that their opinions aren't valid, because and I understand why people feel the way they do, because it is unprofessional what they're doing. But that being said, you do have to kind of see it from their perspective, because it's not really the easiest job in the world. Far from it, in fact. But yeah, those are my 2 cents. Anyways, so stick around, as we're going to be talking about a couple other stories, including a whole bunch of passengers on a United flight that mysteriously became ill to the point where most of them started vomiting, and the plane had to be taken out of service as a result. Why exactly, and what does that mean? Well, stick around to find out.